Hello, welcome back to my world of stuff. Today, it's time for some movie reviews, and I'm going to be looking at two horror films which I've seen in the last few days. That's right, two horror films. In fact, one is a horror film. My God, it's a horror film. The other one is more a sort of a psychological thriller with a horror sort of bent to it, if you like. It sort of straddles the two genres. The two films that are in cinemas now, but you'll have to work to find them a little bit, I think, which is why I wanted to mention them, because I do think it's important to give some publicity and some kudos to films which aren't the big blockbusters. They don't cost $300 million. Horror is in a good place at the moment because it's a genre that's quite cheap to make and makes a lot of money. If you think of films that we've had in the last few years, The Black Phone, the recent Insidious films, Smile, Megan, even things like Saw, these ancient franchises in Halloween and so on. The films that cost buttons but make a lot of money, and the studios like to make a lot of money. And I think it's interesting, slightly off the point I suppose, I think we're going to see a bit of a sea change in the types of films, the scale of films that Hollywood makes once this pesky strike is over, which looks like it's going to be sometime next year the way things are going. I think Hollywood are going to be looking at the numbers that the films have made this year and thinking, certainly superhero films and the big blockbusters aren't making massive profits like they used to. A lot of them are struggling, a lot of them are losing money. And I think that not necessarily horror per se as a genre is going to be a go-to, but I think they're going to be looking at dialing down the money that's spent on big cinema experiences because the returns aren't there anymore. Horror is doing very well. The sort of horrors that I like are subtle horrors. I'm not really into the Screams and Halloweens and Saws and stuff like that. I just found them a bit too mean-minded. When it comes to stabbing and stuff, because stabbing is torn from the headlines, as it were, I'm not really interested in watching films where people are stabbed to death and disemboweled and gouged and stuff like that. It's just a bit too grisly for my liking. I like something which is a little bit creepier, a little bit more unnerving, which brings me to Cobweb. Cobweb is in cinemas now. You'll find it in a lot of cinemas. It's getting a fairly decent release, and so it should. This is a film which is directed by Samuel Bodin and written by Chris Devlin. And this is a very interesting and unusual film. It's very much sort of a chamber piece. Four main characters in it. There's a family, a mum and dad, their young son, Peter. Peter is a bit of a loner. He's played by Woody Norman. The parents are played by Homelander himself from The Boys, Anthony Starr, and Lizzie Kaplan plays Mum. They both seem to be caring and loving parents, but they're also quite brutal and quite ruthless with Peter. Peter's a loner. He's quite imaginative, but he hasn't got many friends at school. He gets beaten up and bullied. And eventually he takes his own revenge in a very particular way. Before that, though, he hears voices. He hears a voice behind the wall of his bedroom, a voice calling to him, "Peter, help me, Peter." He thinks it's a dream. He thinks it's a nightmare. His parents won't give him the time of day for it. But he eventually, the voice behind the wall makes him turn a little bit and plants the seeds of suspicion into his mind about his parents. Meanwhile, in school, a new supply teacher, Miss Devine, played by Cleopatra Coleman. You will have seen her recently in The Infinity Pool, and I remember particularly from a comedy series called The Last Man on Earth, which starred Will Forte, which I really enjoyed, which was cut short a few years back. This is the best performance I've seen from her. I think she's been a little bit stiff and wooden when I've seen her previously. She's very good in this. She plays a supply teacher who feels that something's not right with Peter and his home life, and she goes to investigate, and she sort of becomes, I think they call in horror films, the last girl. She's the one who does what none of us would do at the end of the film. She goes into the belly of the beast, if you like. This is a very, very unusual film, very creepy film. As I said, it is a chamber piece with just these four main characters. The house that the family live in is sort of run down, it's shadowy, it's gloomy looking. The film is very well directed. Samuel Bodin directs it with lots of moody sort of long shots and the use of shadows and things to create extra menace. And it's very, very unnerving all the way through, because you sense that there's something not right. Not necessarily not right about Peter, but not right about the way he has to live. And when we discover what it is, it genuinely is. It reminds you of things like The Ring. It reminded me, the film reminds me of things like The Babadook as well, because it's obviously about a troubled young boy. And the last half an hour is very intense, very creepy. I'm not a person who gets scared by films, because I've seen a lot of them and I am aware of the artifice that I'm watching a film. But I watched this in the dark, which probably didn't help. So you're just focusing on the screen. And it is genuinely quite disturbing in places. There are a few sort of jump scares that made me sort of jump. Some quite nasty sort of... I don't know if nasty is the right word. Some disturbing imagery, I suppose. And at the end it gets scary. It does get scary. If you're out of a nervous disposition, if you're frightened by weirdness, this will scare you, because, it is a scary film in the old school tradition. And that's what I liked about it. It felt like an old school horror film. It doesn't have sassy teenagers running around, social media influencers and people banging on about their phones and Instagram. It's just an old school, quite gothic in a way, horror story, which runs for a very lean and very effective 88 minutes. So it doesn't outstay its welcome. I really enjoyed it. A very, very, very good film. Great performances, really good script, very well photographed. And very, very old school. And I like that about it. It's, it gets quite nasty towards the end, so be warned. It sort of jumps at you quite literally towards the end. But it's very, very good film. Cobweb is in cinemas now, and you should be able to find that in cinemas quite easily. I give Cobweb 8.5 out of 10, boy, yeah. The other film you'll have to work to find. I think, looking it up last night, it's on the Cineworld circuit at the moment, but it's only getting one screening. Certainly in my local, my nearest Cineworld, it's getting a screening at 8:30 in the evening, just the one screening. I suspect it'll only be there this week. So if you want to see this film, you've probably got until Thursday to see it. It probably will turn up on streaming shortly after that. And I think, having seen it, probably it's one that is... I would recommend you watch it on streaming. I don't go out of your way to find it in the cinema. It's not a must-see at the cinema. But it's one that's worth watching probably when it turns up online. It's called Mercy Falls, and it's directed by Ryan Hendrick, also co-wrote the script. I don't know anything about him. I don't know what he's done in the past. I should have looked it up, but I didn't. This stars a cast of unknowns, basically. It's a Scottish horror film, and it's a sort of a survivalist film. Psychological horror. It's not a situation or a scenario that we're not familiar with. The cast are unknowns. You won't know any of these names. It stars Lauren Lyle, who's one of the executive producers of the film as well. She plays Rona. Nicolette McEwen plays Carla, who's the antagonist in the film. And then supporting actors like Layla Kirk, James Watterson. I don't know these names, but they play this group of... they're not teens. They're sort of in their 20s. And they're up in Scotland to find a remote country cabin that Rona's father has passed away, and he's left it to her in his will. It's the only sort of thing he's left her, and she just wants it. She's had a fractious relationship with her father in the past. We're sort of shown that through a specific flashback. So she's slightly sort of traumatised by something from her past. But she and her friends decide to go on a trip to find this cabin, on a hiking trip. None of them are experienced hikers, so they're out of their depth before they start. And when they meet up with a loner called Carla, who is played by Nicolette McEwen, they're even deeper out of their depth. Carla's strange, should we say. She's divisive. She sort of appears that she's part of the group, but she isn't quite. After a while, they sort of lose their direction a little bit, lose their bearings. Something happens which turns the tide of the story, and it transpires that Carla isn't quite who she seems to be. And before long, the group are effectively running for their lives. This is an interesting film. What's interesting about it is that I think there's sort of lots of subtext to it. The title Mercy Falls, for example, it's the name of a waterfall up in the Highlands that they find, and I think that's something that could apply to the characters as well, to both Rona and Carla. They've both been traumatized by something that's happened. Again, we see in Carla's case, we see the trauma that she's been through in her earlier in her life. And as the film wears on, mercy quite literally falls. There is no mercy. And I think it is interesting that the two lead female characters, they both have a specific trauma that shaped them. And that sort of, forms part of the arc of the narrative, if you like. So there's things like that which sort of make the film a bit more cohesive than it might have been, because it's not just about people being stalked through the crackling woods by a lunatic. There's a bit of character there, and actually, because it's a group of about 6 characters, you do get to know them actually as individuals. You sort of know what their characters did. Not particularly well defined, but you get to know them as people, and you quite like them. When things start happening to them, and it's not a spoiler to say that things do start happening to them, you're sort of ouch. Particularly 1 or 2 characters who I quite liked, and you sort of think, oh, that's a shame that person's ended up, this has happened to them. It is one of those films where, it's not a spoiler to say that people in the cast are killed, because that's what the film is all about. So it is quite derivative. It's not something we've not seen before. We've seen these films before with people lost in the woods being stalked, but I think this is done with some good with style. I mean, as I said, the actors are unknown, but they're good performers. The performances are all very good. I have to say the direction is superb. I mean, whatever you think of the film, you might think it's rubbish, but it's very well directed, and it's filmed presumably a low budget because it's all filmed on location. There's no sort of studio stuff, and the director's made really good use of the locations, these Scottish locations, with these obviously drone shots and long shots that really make the location itself a character in the film. And that really gives it a sense of scale that it might not have had. And it's probably why it's managed to work its way onto the big screen, because I think on the big screen it looks really good. You get the scale and the wilderness feel of where they are. I enjoyed this. I mean, it's not as good as Cobweb, but it was an interesting double bill to see them both one after the other last night. And I did enjoy watching it. I was quite conscious of the fact that it was telling an old story, if you like. The core story is something very familiar, but it is done with some intelligence, and there's some really nice visuals. Well, the one thing that lets the film down a little bit, I think, is sort of close combat sequences. A couple of fight scenes which are a bit mannered. You can sort of sense it's actors trying not to hurt each other. But there's some, if you're a person who likes kills in horror films, there are some unpleasant kills here, some decent bits of gore, and all in all, I think it's a nice little film. I'll be interested to see what Ryan Kendrick does next. So I don't know what he's done in the past, but I think he's a very promising talent, certainly in the way he brings the film to the screen. And I think with a better script and a more original story, he could do very well. But it's not a waste of time. But I wouldn't rush to see it in the cinema necessarily. You can watch it at home. You won't get the most of the backdrops and the scenery and so on, but it's not one that you necessarily, you won't get a great cinema experience from it. I'm going to give Mercy Falls, because I did enjoy it, I'm going to give it 7 out of 10. It's an entertaining 100 minutes. It's possibly slightly too long. I think these sorts of films need to be around 90 minutes, and this rocks up at about, I think it's an hour and 3/4, so it's 105 minutes. It sags a little bit in places, but not a waste of time. But as I said, it's one you can watch at home rather than in the cinema. Right, 2 film recommendations for you there. I hope you enjoyed this little video. There are more to come, of course. Not sure when or what, but there will be more videos coming up in the next few days, so stick around. If you've just stumbled across this channel today, why not like and subscribe? That would be marvellous, particularly subscribe, because we're stuck at the moment and can't get forward. And leave a comment down below. Let me know if you've seen these films, what you thought of them, if you're planning to see them. I don't know where that leads exactly, but if you're planning to see them, let me know. Cobweb definitely, is a must. I think, that's a really good, creepy, enclosed space sort of, quite claustrophobic sort of film. Anyway, right, I'm out of here. I'll see you soon. Until I do, keep taking the stuff.